What is up, everybody? Mark on the mic here, joined by my good friend, Mr. Ryan Muckenhirn. We've got a bit of a how-to today, Ryan. We do a lot of bolt-related stuff. We've done some, I think, specifically, or at least, talked about boresighting your bolt gun. Not what we're doing today. And if you're watching on YouTube, you know what we're talking about. Boresighting an AR, which is a little bit different. It's a little bit more involved, a little bit more going on.
I don't know.
Still can be done.
Oh, very easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do we got? What do we got cooking here, Ryan?
Well, we have this Daniel Defense rendition of an AR in front of us, equipped with a Venom 1-6 and a precision extended cantilever. This is a pretty common question that we get on the sales and technical side of things: is how do I boresight this? There's a few methodologies for boresighting, which we're going to lump into two categories: device assisted, and then what I think is the correct way.
Why don't we just, I always ask the question when I'm talking to somebody who I perceive as an expert.
Yeah.
Which you fall into that category, Ryan.
Pulled the wool over your eyes all these years.
People are like, yeah, I mean, you can do this, you can do that. And I'm like, how would you do it?
Yeah. So I don't want to knock or poo-poo all the devices. I will say they often present more challenges than they do solutions. So there are three basic types. There's cartridge insert that projects a laser down your bore onto the wall. There's muzzle insert that projects a laser from your bore to the wall. And then there's like a prismatic or collimating style device that typically they're either like an arbor that you insert into the barrel and then expand. And then there's like this neat little prism block in there that has a grid on it, or something that sticks to the muzzle via a magnet. There's a time and place for all three, I think.
Okay.
A good example would be, I'll pick on a weapon system that's common and is exempted from the traditional bore sight, as we're going to demonstrate today, but like a Remington 740 or 742 or 760 or 7600 or 7400 or a Benelli R1. Anything that has like a sealed or closed breech system that you cannot remove the bolt and look down the bore.
Right.
Your options at that point in time are only laser,
right,
or optical bore sighting device. And for that, they work pretty well. If you have access to the bore of the firearm visually, this is, in my opinion, always the most reliable method. So when we have a mount come into the shop here, and we'll just say an AR, for example, this is standard procedure. This is what we do with every single one of them that comes in, to get that right. And to touch on that a little bit, like why I don't always love those cartridge type inserts, for instance. Success is predicated on the fitment of that cartridge type insert into the chamber itself. Most of those, as I've measured them, are wildly undersized so that they fit a huge variety of chambers.
Gotcha.
In that respective size. And because the bolts, if you run them with the bolt in, the ejector and extractor mechanism are going to put bias on them. It'll push them around inside your chamber and give you a false positive. We also have to assume that when the laser was inserted into the device itself, that it was square, which often they're not. With the muzzle type inserts, and I'll pick on a really good unit, Sightlight Industries SL500. This is like military issue, really clever unit. It's set up for success. They have to be tuned for the individual arm that they're being used with. Where you take them out of the box, they inspire just stick it in the muzzle, point it at your wall, adjust your optic. Sometimes that works. Most often it does not. So they'll have 4.
Is it working good enough to get you on paper and you do the rest from there? Like with kind of all these things you're talking about, like are you saying like the way you prefer to do it is just going to get you you're going to be closer with it?
Maybe. So usually the laser devices are done at very short distances. So like 30 feet. And when we're working at such close distances, the adjustments that we make for the systems like exacerbate over time and distance. So, a 1-inch discrepancy at 10 yards is a 10-inch discrepancy at 100 yards. And that's big. So if they're not tuned properly, that will just simply translate downrange and often leads to a lot of frustration. One of the more common emails that we see, hey, I went to Boresight this and I ran out of adjustment trying to Boresight it. And then we go through a series of questions like, what means and methodology are you using when Boresighting? Is it like a laser, an optical Boresight? Are you doing the old-fashioned way? Most of the time it ends up being a laser. And then we'll dig deeper, cartridge insert, muzzle type insert. And if it's cartridge insert, a lot of times it's like, well, that's what that product will yield. If it's muzzle insert, sometimes we can back our way out of that and we say, hey, here's the tuning procedure for something like the SL500. This is how you do it. And a lot of those customers come back like, oh, that worked perfect. But there is extra steps involved with those that will make or break the situation. The prismatic or the optical style systems aren't necessarily as finicky, depending. Like this gun has a muzzle device on it, and so a lot of those arbors aren't long enough to reach into the bore and centrate and secure properly. So that is somewhat disqualifying for some of them. The magnetic ones, well, that muzzle device is its own entity. It's built on a different machine. It has a completely different set of tolerances. It is attached to the barrel via a threaded stud. That's cut into the barrel. It shoulders against a crush washer, which from here, 3 feet away, I can see is not perfectly centered. Any bias that's in that muzzle device, up, down, left, right, is going to translate to the optical device that's then clipped to it. That bias you'll then account for with the optic, and then when you go down range, you'll be off. So if you can do the method that we're going to illustrate and describe today, most often you'll find the greatest degree of success with it.
And now we are back to how would you do it?
This is how I would do it. So the term bore sight is pretty literal. We sight down the bore. We adjust the optic to align with that item, object, or thing that we are sighting at down the bore. We are bore sighting. Naval term, when we used to shoot each other with cannons that were breech loading, you wanted to shoot that ship, you look down the breech of your cannon, point it, throw a charge in there, drop a ball down the bore, and light her off.
It makes a lot of sense.
It does, yeah, absolutely. So it's a very crude analog method that works really well if you have a little bit of patience.
Those cannons are a hell of a peep sight.
Big time, yeah, big time. So what's nifty and useful about the AR is that the upper comes off of the lower. And what we need to do is pull that off of there. Well, you may need to, depending on what kind of rest you have. So we're working with this Tipton gun vise here, and I'm just going to pop these pins, which I've pre-loosened because they were pretty snug on the old Daniel.
It's like when I handed you that jar of pickles the other day. I loosened it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you sure did, pal. So once we've separated the lower from the upper, we just have our upper here. We want to pull the bolt carrier group out, which if this is your first AR, don't be afraid of these things. There's like 3 moving parts. So
you got these 2 pins here.
Yep, 2 pins. The takedown pins, there's a rear and a front on the upper, or excuse me, on the weapon system on the lower. They can be snug. This Daniel Defense required a punch. It is quite snug. Drift those out. We separate our upper and our lower. Moving rearward to the rifle system, we grab our charging handle. We just kind of pop it loose, and that's going to disengage our bolt from the lugs, or excuse me, the lug receptacles and the barrel extension. And then we've got our bolt carrier and bolt out. So now we have an empty upper, if you will. So I can look behind there through the through hole where the bolt carrier group went, and I can see down the bore. Now, the podcast room is pretty big, but it's not that big. We're going to play pretend. We're going to say that wall behind you is somewhere between 25 and 50 yards away.
Okay.
I usually like to do 50 to 100 yards with this if I can. The shorter you go, again, those angles compound in linear value as we move out. So I like to move it as close to my intended distance to 0 as I can. I've done short bore sights before. We can talk about some tips and tricks to maximize success with those, but we're going to pretend that back wall is 50 yards away.
Is there because of the height over bore of this type of system? Are there any considerations a person wants to make there when doing this?
Absolutely. So especially in the short distances. So if you have worked with one of those bore sighting devices like the sight light that goes into the muzzle, because they do it at a short distance, they have a zeroing target that they send with the product that has a spot where your laser goes, and then above it, about 2.5 inches, a spot where your reticle goes.
Gotcha.
And that is to compensate for that overbore height that you're talking about, Mark. So at such a short distance, if we were to adjust the optic so that it met that laser path and intersected at that distance, it would be as if we are zeroing the rifle at 30 feet, which downrange, like if you went to 100 yards, you'd be so far above your target that you'd be back chasing your tail. So you do have to take that into consideration. And if you are doing a visual bore sight or the old-fashioned bore sight at a short distance, you'll want to do the same thing. So usually, if that's the case, I'm gonna pick a subject or a target that has some sort of feature on it that I can reference in both the optic and the bore, and where I'm going to end up putting my reticle when I do the bore sight is above that feature. So we've got some signage out front that works really good. It's a 2-colored sign. There's like a very bold green part and then a very bold white part, and I will adjust accordingly if I have to do a short one. If I'm doing a long one, it's kind of just spot on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and you don't really need a ton of room. I mean, a lot of these ARs get zeroed at 50 yards. So
Absolutely, yeah. So,
another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
We've kind of got it in this tipped-in gun vise here. Maybe potentially like a little trickier to get it level, perhaps. Like, how critical is like making sure that everything is level when you're bore sighting?
Not so much. Stable is the important part.
Okay.
So I have done this on bath towels,
Sure.
bags of sand.
A bag of sand? Come on, man.
I've done this on things like this gun vise.
I mean, yeah, we have the gun vise here, but like you said, I mean, you could take this off, set it on this table right here, or this block, like you said, and still look through it just as long as it is stable. Yeah.
Yes.
And also stable when you're making your adjustments, right?
Yeah. Oh, also, we should back up. This is assuming that the optic has been mounted, leveled, and is secure. Like, we are in a condition of post-mount. Everything's good there. We are now moving forward to just prior to firing the shot. So we're, for intents and purposes, stable on the system here. And like I said, I've got a thing that I'm looking at on the wall. All I'm going to do is look down the bore of the rifle from the rear, and I'm going to align the upper receiver and the bore with that thing that I'm looking at. So I peek down the bore here, and I can see we have a drum magazine on the wall there, and we can see the center of that where the kind of the winding mechanism is. I've got that centered in the bore itself. And when I look up through the optic, well, I can see I'm way above it, and I'm a little bit to the left. So if I'm going to pretend that this is at 50 yards, I'm going to over-adjust this because we're actually closer to about 6 yards, maybe a little bit less than that from where I'm standing. I center up that kind of winding mechanism on that device, and I make adjustments into the optic to bring the reticle down to it. And I'm going to end up just a bit above it. I'm going to go about 4 MOA above it. And then I'm going to center up left and right. About right there. So now I've touched the gun a little bit. So I want to go back and reference in my bore that what I'm looking at is still centered. And then back up into the optic. And it's good.
Had you had the 50 yards to work with,
yep.
I mean, you would just line them up exactly, yes?
Close to, yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And this does get you appreciably close. Every so often I'll pull a rabbit out of a hat and I'll have like a on-the-button bore sight. Like when you and I went deer hunting a few weeks ago, I may have zeroed my rifle leaving here to meet you at deer camp. Something about the cobbler's kids don't have something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
And my bore sight at 50 yards put me about 3/4 of an inch low and about 3/4 of an inch right from the target.
Yeah.
Mostly luck. I do a lot of bore sighting. We do it with every gun that comes in here. Every time we do a range cert, we do a bore sight. You will actually learn what the individual rifle's preferences are. So like, for instance, when I'm bore sighting the Tikas down on the range, I end up below my target every time. Centered left to right, but below it probably 3 inches. And that usually puts me within about 3 inches of zeroed up, down, left, right. If I go spot on, I'm always high.
Well, and I would think too, this is not an exact science.
Certainly not.
And oftentimes we talk about, this load. Like, I've shot different loads out of my gun that just kind of impact
Different
consistently, but a different spot.
Absolutely.
So you're going to have some variance there too.
Absolutely. I will give a hat tip to devices like the Sightlight Boresighter, because when you do understand exactly what you just said, like the preference that your gun has to print a given load in a given spot, and you adjust the sight light to it, they hold that coordinate fairly well. And you can remove that device, put it back in its stowing container, move about the country, put it back in, and make a check. And oftentimes, you're pretty damn close.
Gotcha.
So they're cool when you have them tuned right. There's a little bit more ambiguity here, because like my centration behind the bore, like I can still see the device on the wall that I'm referencing here, and I can place it at different spots in the bore.
Sure.
The further I go with that, the easier it is for me to kind of flub that a little. So I'll have some plus minus variance up, down, left, or right. It's just important to try to get as well centered behind the bore as possible. So there's some visual indicators that I'm looking at. Like I can see the chamber, and I can see the leads and where the lands and grooves start. And you get the we'll call it the entrance of the bore, like just forward of the chamber, appears wider than the muzzle does. If I can properly centrate the aperture that is my muzzle within the aperture that is the lead, I'm well centered on it. And then that's what I'll do. I'll get behind there and I'll say, okay, that's about on the button. And then just jump behind the optic and take a look. But yeah, very low tech, very low impact, very quick. This is something that you can do in the field too if you take a spill.
Right.
Yep. And I've done that before, and it can save you a ton of frustration and a ton of time, and hopefully keep you from missing your shot when you need to take it. But it's not a huge undertaking. It's something you can do at home, do in the field whenever.
Well, and this method is nice because, I guess you might need, a punch to take down the rifle a little bit, but other than that, toolless.
Yep. Correct.
So,
and
some simplicity there.
Yeah, no wild mechanisms, no other fancy devices. Very, like I said, very analog, somewhat crude, but very effective.
Prior to podcasting, Ryan, we were chatting this morning, and we said, gosh, this one might actually be 10 minutes.
Did we make close?
Closer.
Close-ish.
Are we ever going to do it again?
I don't know. I think the people would be upset. At this point in time, it's somewhat of an expectation that that 10-minute talk.
We gave ourselves we were unrealistic.
Well, I don't know about unrealistic. We were maybe hopeful. But I don't want to say that either, because that seems like we don't like to talk about it for a long time.
That's just it.
Yeah, we love talking.
We're having a good time. Awesome. Well, thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
Super informative. If you're looking to boresight your AR, couple ways to do it. This is how Ryan would do it most often.
Yep.
And, until next time, we'll catch you on the next one. Happy hunting and shooting. Bye, everybody.
See ya.